to put their cast ballots in a black box and leave the area.
Mga 30 minutes.
Ano nangyari talaga, ma'am?
Ayaw talaga magbasa ng machine.
So, paano yun? Paano nyo tinanggap?
Hindi pa. Kasi hindi naman pinasok pa ngayon. Nilagay mo na nila sa, dun sa parang box na black na yun. Ayun, no?
Ang ginagawa po natin ay nire-report natin siya at kinakapit agad natin si Comelec at si DESO na kailangan agad ng mabilisang aksyon at tugon doon sa nagmamanufacturing ng mga machine.
Meanwhile, Manila mayoral candidate Hani Lacuna cast her vote at Legarda Elementary School at around 9 a.m. It all went smoothly.
Una pong tungkulin ko sa pagboto, hindi lang po sa Manila, kundi para sa buong Pilipinas. Hopefully, matapos o makaboto halos lahat bago po dumating ang pag-close po ng 7 p.m.
At Aurora Aragon Quezon Elementary School in San Andres, Malate, Manila, an overheated ceiling fan inside precinct 2797 AC caught fire and briefly disrupted the voting exercise. The precinct was immediately transferred to the school auditorium.
Mga nangyari siya mga around 8:30. Kasi medyo nagkaroon ng konting amoy ng electrical wire. Tapos napansin na lang namin biglang pumutok yung ceiling fan. Bigla na siyang pumutok tapos umapoy. Then kaming DI, first namin ginawa sinave namin yung BCM. Nababa namin siya agad.
Nagpanik ang mga tao pero na-fix naman, dumating naman ang Bureau of Fire natin with some police officers.
In less than an hour, voting will close, but there are still long voters' queues here at Legarda Elementary School, and they are all determined to cast their votes. And that's the latest here in Manila. Back to you, Pinky.
Thanks a lot, Stanley Gaheta. Now let's get some reports from the regions. Long lines and technical problems greeted thousands of Cebuanos at the polling precincts today. Our Cebu-based correspondent Dale Israel joins us live from there. Dale, maayong gabi.
Mayong gabi, Pinky. The long lines of people waiting to get their chance to vote at the polling centers did not subside here in Cebu City, especially in the barangays with huge number of voters. In fact, at least 28 people were taken in by ambulances while waiting in line in different polling centers as of noontime. The Cebu City Ambulance Services has asked the public for patience when calling for emergencies, since they are extremely busy attending to people who are fainting and those that seeking medical assistance due to dizziness. Apart from the huge crowd, there are also problems with some vote counting machines. In the entire Cebu province, there are about 50 defective VCMs that eventually were repaired or replaced by Comelec's tech personnel. Among the areas affected include the towns of Cordova, Barili, Oslob, and the cities of Cebu and Mandaue. During a joint press conference at Camp Serio Osmeña in Cebu City, Comelec Regional Director Dennis Ausan sought understanding amid mounting complaints from voters. There are also those that had to stand in line for up to 4 hours before they could cast their vote. Ausan said there is just enormous interest from the people to participate in this year's elections, with Comelec making sure the health and safety protocols are followed. In Central Visayas region, there are also at least 3 defective VCMs that need to be replaced. These are from Duero Town in Bohol and 2 other machines from 2 precincts in Lassi, Siquijor Province. Back to you, Pinky.
Daran salamat, Dale Israel reporting live from Cebu. Meanwhile, now we are going to be joined by Interior Undersecretary Jonathan Malaya. Before we discuss pressing issues today, we just want to know that we want you to know that you only have 52 minutes left before the polling precincts close. Yusek, nakita ko nakaboto na po kayo.
Yes, nakaboto na ako, and to those our countrymen na hindi pa po nakakaboto, please do so. You have to be at the polling center at exactly 7. And, your name must be listed by the BEIs for you to be able to vote, because if you arrive at 7:01 or 7:02 and you're not in the list, you won't be able to vote anymore.
Kailangan nandun talaga yung pangalan mo. Did you have problems voting?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I'm glad. No, but before I went to my polling center, I first visited, as I said, in BF Homes before we started the show. I first visited my old polling center, and nakita ko doon there was a malfunctioning voting machine.
Okay, tell us more about that.
It was, yeah. Ang problema kasi when a voting counting machine malfunctions, it starts a domino effect, no? Kasi nung umaga, I saw really a lot of people. It was, I think it will be higher than the last election. The interest here is very high. A lot of people want to vote. So, siguro kalahating kilometro yung pilang nakita ko kanina.
Saan to?
Inside BF Homes,
Also,
the
doon
polling
din.
center, yes. So, nasa kalsada yung mga tao, ang haba-haba ng pila. But when I got to my polling center, it wasn't as long as the one across PCJ.
Bakit ganun? Siguro kasi maiinggit yung iba dito, haba-haba ng linya dito, halos wala.
Well, based on my experience kanina, when I went inside the polling place itself, yung sa loob ng school, maayos na siya. No? Pag nandun ka na, nag-aantay ka na, and then the voting machine is functioning perfectly,
Yeah.
wala nang problema. But it's really the crowd outside. I think parang dumagsa talaga yung mga tao. They really want to vote. And because of our clustered precinct system, where only one counting machine caters to several precincts, talagang dagsaan talaga yung
Kasi
mga tao.
clustered nga, kaya nga tinatawag na clustered, ipinagsama-sama sa isang vote counting machine. We have
Yes.
about 106,000 clustered precincts with about 106,000 VCMs as well.
Yes.
And sabi ng COMELEC, there were supposed to be 2,000 extra VCMs. Just also for everybody's siguro information, itong mga problema ng problems on the jamming or on the VCMs in general, this is really the responsibility of the COMELEC, no? Hindi po ito DILG. Pero
Yes.
pwedeng magsumbong sa inyo.
Well, even if magsumbong sa amin, baka di na namin ma-actionan because this is something that is under the jurisdiction of the COMELEC, and for the purposes of running the elections and running the vote counting machines is the Department of Education, who is the deputized agents of the COMELEC. Kami naman, we're mostly focused on the security preparations and to ensure that there are election-related violence is addressed and other support needed by the COMELEC.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Ito pong mga security preparations. There was a press briefing a while ago, COMELEC together with the AFP and PNP, and before we went on break, sabi ko, we have you to talk about this. Tell us, let's start first with, is there anything near in Luzon? Mag-umpisa muna tayo sa Luzon.
Yes, meron tayong two incidents in Nueva Ecija. This is the most that we have right now, no? So tama sila COMELEC kanina when they said that this was generally a peaceful election. But you know, sabi ko nga kanina that I told you, there's still the canvassing part. And sa canvassing, it starts at 7 o'clock, no? And baka mamaya may mga lugar na mawala ng kuryente. See? You know.
Yeah,
So,
that's part two.
Yeah.
Just to be very frank about it.
That's right.
First is, botohan.
Botohan.
Pangalawa, bilangan.
Yes.
Okay.
Pero yung bilangan kasi natin ngayon, hindi gaya nung dati na manual. So, pag pinasok mo yung balota, binilang na yon. So, all that the BIs need to do, the electoral boards need to do, is to total it, no? Press a certain button which will total it and then transmit it. So,
To the COMELEC
to the
server.
COMELEC server. So, really, the challenge now is to get that transmitted. The challenge is, kailangan natin itawid, kumbaga. Itawid natin ito until ma-canvas, ma-transmit, and then ma-proklama yung mga nanalo. So, there's still a few days that we have to fix our attention to make sure that everything falls into the right places.
You were talking about Nueva Ecija.
Yes. We have two incidents there. The first one was in San Antonio, Nueva Ecija, where we arrested 7 people and confiscated 8 assorted firearms. No? There was a convoy of a certain mayor there, no, which figured in an incident. So we had to make some arrests. The other one is the more recent one. It's a General Pino in Nueva Ecija, where 23 individuals were arrested. And there was a election-related violence where 5 individuals were wounded and firearms were also confiscated
no?
by the Philippine National
Yun yung
Police.
tinatanong kanina during the press briefing. Tinatanong, ano ba ang PAG, yung private armed groups?
Yes.
What constitutes a PAG, yung private armed group?
Well,
Paano ho ba pag private armed group na yun?
Well, the President has made several statements about this, no? He defined a private armed group following the Alunan Doctrine. The President said that politicians are entitled to only 2 bodyguards, armed bodyguards, and anything in excess of 2 is already a private armed group. So we're following that principle. In this case, very clear, this is a private armed group because it exceeds the Alunan doctrine of 2 armed individuals per politician.
Okay, that's in Luzon. Anything in Visayas? Kasi medyo marami-rami ho ata yung Mindanao.
Yes, surprisingly, I have nothing right now. No, this is the serious incidents. No, we have no reports in the Visayas, and isa pala, Pinky, before I forget, we practically have no failure of election anywhere in the country today. No failure of election because in Cotabato, where there was a threat against the teachers and the teachers refused to render election service, the PNP took over. There's a law which was passed several years back which made election service voluntary, and in that same law, it authorized the PNP as the agency of last resort. So we prepared a
SMC, San Miguel Corporation. Bisag unsang industriya ang sudlan niini, tinguha sa SMC ang pag-uswag o paglabo sa mga Pilipino. Karon, gikan sa SMC, aniya na ang SMC Davao Cement. SMC Davao Cement. Gama sa Davao para sa Mindanao. SMC Davao Cement. Ato ni Bay.
RPN DXKT 1071 sa dial sa inyong mga radyo.
Yung setting sa Cotabato, yan ho ba yung mga guro na ilang beses napalitan?
I'm not entirely sure, Pinky, no?
Okay.
I don't have the data right now, but I was just told before I came to your show na we had 175 precincts which are manned right now by police officers from the PNP in Cotabato City.
And then let's go to, well, there was a question, I hope we can bring that back rather on our teleprompter, yung pong sa Maguindanao. There
Yes.
was a problem
Buluan.
there. Yeah, yung, go ahead, sir.
Yes, we have a report about an incident in Buluan, Maguindanao. This was yesterday, no? And the area has already been secured. The PNP is in control of the situation, and the elections are proceeding as planned. So, okay na yon, that area. And in almost all the areas where there were election-related violence, may report lang, pasok yung ating kapulisan, secure the area, and the elections are proceeding as planned. Meron lang isa, Pinky, yung sa Danao del Sur,
Okay.
where some VCMs were destroyed. No, we're still awaiting the report from the Police Regional Office BARM
Oh,
about this. No, before I came to the show,
Lano del Sur yan.
yes, Lanao
Okay.
del Sur in Barangay Magunaya, Binidayan, Lanao del Sur.
Okay.
And I think some of our netizens were the ones that shared this. It became viral.
I think I saw that, but you know, we were still trying to verify that. I saw that on Twitter as well.
Yes.
So, hindi pa resolved yung problema doon?
We also forwarded this to the Directorate for Operations in Lanao del Sur to verify if this is indeed an incident. We don't have feedback yet from BARM.
Yung what the AFP spokesperson a while ago was saying, si Colonel Demi Zagala, there were a number of incidents in Mindanao, grenade throwing, etc. Meron pong incident dun din po sa Maguindanao last night. There were explosions in Datu Unsay and Sharif Agwak.
Yes, yes. But fortunately, there were no casualties reported. So, alam niyo naman sa BARM, di ba? These things are part and parcel of the way they do things there. So, what is good is that there were no injuries among any of our countrymen, and the elections proceeded as planned.
But Colonel Zagala was talking about some injuries, no? Actually, in the Visayas, sorry, just to jump to that, there was a councillor of Lapu-Lapu City that was killed. It was a reporter who said that a while ago, reported that to us, by 3 men eve of the elections.
Yeah, in Lapu-Lapu City.
Right, that one.
Oh, ano yan? That's a highly urbanized area. Lapu-Lapu City, where the airport is located.
But I think it's an island near Lapu-Lapu City. I'll give you the details, sir, a little later on. It was our stringer who reported that a while ago. So your assessment so far, again, I know what you're saying. This is just the, one half of the elections. So far, generally peaceful because the reports are coming out that there are about more or less 2,000 problems with VCMs. But if you really look at the totality of that, according to the COMELEC, 106,000 VCMs, it's a small percentage. But
That's right.
abala pa rin po.
Yes, abala dun sa mga lugar, and these are the places that are in the news, of course, no? Because before I came in, I just came from Caloocan City High School. Things are doing well there. I went through several polling precincts and several buildings. People are happy. The teachers are tired. They want to go home.
Yeah.
But essentially, things have moved fast there. In the morning, there were long lines, but in the afternoon, everything has been resolved. So generally, if we look at the national situation as of right now, we are generally it's been peaceful. People have been able to cast their vote, and we don't see any disenfranchisement. Although I do hear one or two complaints about misreading of the ballot, just like what the elderly gentleman shared to us in your report, that he voted for someone else, but the machine reflected a different candidate. So I also heard about that and saw some reports, but I think that is something for the COMELEC to address.
Sabi niya, hindi niya boto yon, boto ng makina yon.
Yes.
Yun ang sinabi ng elderly man a while ago. Let's talk about briefly vote buying.
Yes.
Is this solely the responsibility now of the COMELEC? Does the DILG have any participation here in trying to address issues on vote buying?
Yes, we, in fact, in 2019, a week before the election, we were able to, for the first time, constitute a task force against vote buying under the leadership of the COMELEC at the time. So for this election early last year, we already wrote to COMELEC to reconstitute the task force contra Bigay. Unfortunately, it took them a while for them to issue the COMELEC resolution and the guidelines. It just came out this week. So a few days ago, the DILG Secretary Anyo directed the organization of anti-vote buying teams. No, I'm not saying that we won't be able to, we can't act on election vote buying if the teams are not constituted. Of course, the responsibility is always there, but sometimes it makes more sense if you have a dedicated team, whose job is to just address reports of vote buying. And unfortunately, I don't know. I'm waiting for the reports from the ground of how many of these teams were actually constituted, and if they were able to act on allegations of vote buying.
But are you sure the groups have been formed?
That's why I wanted to find out, no? Because the guidelines came late in the day, and we had to issue the directive to the field. And the directive of Secretary Anyo was to organize one team per city and then another team per congressional district.
Yeah.
So the target was to have as many teams as there are cities and there are congressional districts in a certain province.
Okay, but the approval from the COMELEC came a little late.
Yes, it took some while. In fact, I had to call the COMELEC Monday.
But why is that? Katulong na sana ho kayo para tingnan itong mga report kahit nakikita sa Twitter.
Well, I guess the COMELEC had a lot on its hands, and it took a while for them to go through the guidelines because the guidelines are, have to
SMC,
be issued
San
because
Miguel
it's
Corporation.
necessary for the agencies
Bisag
to
unsang
understand what their
industriya ang
responsibilities are,
sudlan
like
niini,
the DILG,
tinguha
the
sa
PNP,
SMC ang
and then the
pag-uswag
Department of
o
Justice,
paglambo sa mga
will,
Pilipino.
of course, find
Karon,
the necessary cases
gikan sa
for it.
SMC,
So,
aniya
we were
na
hoping that
ang
the guidelines would
SMC
be sooner,
Davao
but
Cement.
unfortunately, it was
SMC
Then,
Davao
last-
Cement.
any last reminder
Gama
to
sa Davao,
voters and to the public?
para sa Mindanao. SMC
I hope we
Davao
ran
Cement.
behind the winner.
Ato ni Bay.
No? At the end of the day, democracy is about who the majority, whoever is the voice of the majority. Definitely, there will always be a minority in any democratic nation or democratic country. So once the winners are proclaimed, we should give them a chance to prove themselves. Whoever wins in the elections, let's give them the benefit, of a good honeymoon period so that they can start serving the country with all the possible leeway that we can give. Because at the end of the day, they did win the election.
Interior Undersecretary Jonathan Malaya. Sir, thank you so much. Good to see you again in person.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
CNN Philippines is your most trusted destination for live, up-to-the-minute, in-depth coverage of today's historic vote. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching a CNN Philippines special presentation, the Filipino Votes Election Day 2022. The Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, or CBCP, has called for a 3-day intense prayer for the 2022 general elections, which started yesterday. In a statement, CBCP President Bishop Pablo Virgilio David said, prayer is the best way to fight this battle. He recommended for the dioceses in the country to keep their parishes open and the Blessed Sacrament open as well for adoration from May 8 to 10. He also urged communities of consecrated persons to do the same in their convent chapels. On election day at 6 a.m. or upon the opening of polling precincts, church bells rang for 10 minutes to remind the faithful to exercise their civic duty as citizens to vote, and to do so in the spirit of prayer. Let's get an update on the elections in Ilocos Norte. Our senior correspondent, Lois Calderon, is there. Lois, go ahead.
Pinky, voting precincts will close in less than an hour from now, and election officials are doing a final call for those registered voters who have yet to cast a ballot. That wraps up a humid 13-hour voting window that began with a sort of a spectacle that we see only every 6 years. Supporters of presidential frontrunner Bongbong Marcos jostled with local, foreign journalists, one side trying to get a glimpse of the Ilocano leader, while us trying to film him casting his vote and get sound bites. True to form, as he has been for the most part of the 3-month campaign period, Marcos evaded journalists who were boxed out and banned from entering the polling precinct. Through the classroom window, both supporters and journalists watched Marcos cast his
Autism awareness is growing rapidly. Unfortunately, many still hold beliefs about autism that are untrue. This lack of understanding can make it difficult for people to receive the proper support they need. Autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability that can cause challenges in communication, social skills, behavior, and learning. The term spectrum refers to a wide range of symptoms and severity. While there's no cure for this condition, intensive and early treatment can make a huge difference in people's lives. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and we bring you the knowledge and care you need and deserve. You're watching Net Talk Health Talk only on CNN Philippines. Misconceptions about autism can make people living with this condition feel isolated and lonely. Our guest today will help us understand this condition as well as dispel some of the misconceptions or misinformation surrounding it. With us is Dr. Catherine Baltazar Braganza, who is a neurodevelopmental pediatrician from UST Hospital and the Philippine Children's Medical Center. Also joining us is Ms. Mona Magno-Veluz. She is the National President of Autism Society Philippines. Now, let's go through some of the more common misconceptions about autism. I'll start off with that all people with autism have the same skills as well as difficulties or challenges. I'll start with Ms. Mona. What is the truth with that, Ms. Mona?
The truth is, autism, like you said, is a spectrum. In our experience, it is not even just a flat, straight line. It is a sphere. So somebody who may be very, very intelligent may have debilitating anxiety. Somebody who may not be verbal can be such a talented artist. So in fact, even the terms low functioning, high functioning is something that is deceiving because they are so different and so valid. The autism of my son is very different from how the autism manifests in, for example, the clients of Dr. Kat.
But I'd like to go to another misconception, and that is that children with autism are unruly, noisy, very aggressive, very awkward in social situations, maingay. Now, there are those with autism who may shout or hit when distressed, but this isn't the case for all. It's rare for someone with autism to intentionally cause harm to someone else or another person. Miss Mona, why are some perceived to be as aggressive?
When somebody on the autism spectrum cannot express themselves, or they may have other conditions, like sometimes they are unable to sleep at night, or they have gut issues, masakit ang tiyan nila, syempre pagising nila, they're going to be agitated. So what we see as aggressive behaviors or sometimes unruly behaviors, especially in the classroom, is not just that. That is a manifestation of other sensory or medical issues that that person on the autism spectrum may have.
Another misconception is that people with autism aren't capable of forming meaningful relationships as well as friendships. They often have very strong bonds with important people in their lives, and they can fulfill relationships with family, friends, partners, and children. Dr. Catherine, this time, please tell us more about this. Yan ang misconception, na kapag autistic ang isang tao, hindi siya makaka-form ng relationship.
Maybe the reason why people think of it as that is because they have difficulties with social emotional reciprocity. So they think if a person with autism would be approached, they would have a different way of communicating what they are thinking or their thoughts. That's why they think they couldn't form special relationships. But you are right, they do form special relationships with their loved ones. We feel that as their doctors, and also the teachers could attest to that.
But another common misconception is that people with autism have an intellectual disability. Now, some people with the condition do have this, but others have IQ within the typical range or even higher. Now, we shouldn't restrict their opportunities for education and social interactions by making assumptions about their intellectual abilities. Dr. Catherine, can you expound a little bit on this?
Recent studies would say that only 30% of children with autism would have intellectual disability. So that's a common misconception, maybe because sometimes they do not know how to respond well. So the people would think, oh, maybe they have intellectual disability because it's one of their core deficits. But no, a lot of people with autism would have high IQ. They would just have interest. They would master those interests and do good on it.
People with autism have difficulty expressing their feelings or express them differently, but they're capable of feeling the full spectrum of emotions. Ms. Mona, please explain on this concept and why this is so.
They are capable of those feelings, but they express it in a different way. So somebody who is very interested in you and wants to connect with you, for example, may start talking about their interest. They would be obsessed with a TV show, and that's all they would talk to you about. It's not about that show that they're expressing. They are expressing their interest in you, and that is their only way that they know how to connect. In terms of the feelings, they also may have difficulty in expressing it in facial expression. Sometimes they also have difficulty in understanding what the facial expression of the person in front of them is talking about. So this is something that we teach, believe it or not, in occupational therapy, in speech therapy. That is a skill that they have to acquire through intervention. But they are capable of so much emotion and so much passion.
Another common misconception or myth about autism is that it is a childhood condition that can be outgrown or cured even. Now, autism characteristics start early in life and continue through adulthood, which is why it can't be outgrown. Could you explain how they should look at this?
Autism is described as a lifelong condition. So the symptoms would change from time to time. So maybe that's why others would think that it could be outgrown. So a study done in 2020 said that around approximately 9% of those children earlier diagnosed with autism don't meet the criteria anymore by youth. So things that were found similar to those children who do not meet the criteria later on would have good cognitive skills by 2 years old and early intervention.
When we return, we'll discuss the symptoms and causes of ASD. We're your connection to healthcare. You're watching Med Talk Health Talk.
SMC, San Miguel Corporation. Bisag unsang industriya ang sudlan niini, tinguha sa SMC ang pag-uswag o paglambo sa mga Pilipino. Karon, gikan sa SMC, aniya na ang SMC Davao Cement. SMC Davao Cement. Gama sa Davao, para sa Mindanao. SMC Davao Cement. Ato ni Bay.
ASD varies widely in symptoms and severity, so making a diagnosis may be challenging. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and you're watching MedTalk Health Talk. We're together in health. Diagnosing ASD can be challenging, even difficult, as there's no medical test to determine if they have it. Dr. Kath, with that being said, paano na-diagnose, or how does one meet the diagnostic criteria for having autism spectrum disorder?
We base our diagnosis in DSM-5. So the core deficits are usually grouped into two. It could be social deficits in social communication and repetitive, restricted behavior, interests, or activities. The deficits in social communication would include social reciprocity, so nonverbal communicative behavior. So these are the abnormalities in eye contact or use of gestures, and maintaining and understanding relationships. Symptoms for the repetitive, restricted behavior, interests, or activities would include stereotype or repetitive motor movements. That's what others would always see, the hand flapping, repetitive jumping or clapping, insistence on sameness or inflexibility to the routines, and hyper or hyposensitivities to sensory input.
Many children don't receive a diagnosis until they're much older. And this delay might cause these children to not get the early help that they need, because the symptoms of ASD will normally appear during childhood, approximately around the toddler age, which is around 1 to 2 years old. What are some of the common signs shown by individuals with autism?
The most common that we see in clinics is language delay. So they don't get to talk on the age that we're expecting them to talk. And usually they come because of poor response to social overtures, meaning when you call them, they don't look at you. They don't turn their head. So red flags that were published include by 12 months, they does not respond to name calling. So that's also the most common symptom that we see. Second is does not point to objects to show interest. So they don't engage in joint attentions. They don't tell you if they're happy or they like something. And then by 18 months, they do not pretend play.
What is your advice for parents? When should they see a doctor?
What we suggest to parents who come to us is always trust your gut. If your child, as you see them, as you observe them, is already exhibiting certain things that were not, for something that you did not see in your older child, then you go to a doctor. Also, sometimes when they have cousins, you can compare. You go to a doctor. Also, if you have autism in your family, sometimes your family members can also give you guidance and, okay, that might be a red flag, let's go and check. So our advice is, when in doubt, go to your doctor.
We've been talking about children most of this time, but adults can also have ASD. And this doesn't mean that they develop the condition in adulthood. Most likely, they were unaware that they had this condition or weren't diagnosed when they were children. Ms. Mona, what are the symptoms of ASD in adults?
The reason why people get to a certain age and not be diagnosed, they have a term for it. They call it masking. If your parent tells you you're not supposed to feel that, you're not supposed to do that, then the person tries to adapt. And this happens a lot in girls. They say that girls mask better than boys. We do see a lot of adults on the autism spectrum who have not been diagnosed earlier. In my program called ASP Autism Works, we try to find employment for those who are on the spectrum. And the late diagnosis applicants that we get usually go to their psychologist or their psychiatrist for other concerns. For example, they have difficulty in holding a job or difficulty in expressing themselves to their family or to friends. So these are other issues that bring them to the professionals, and with the professional, they get the diagnosis.
But another common misconception that I'd like to point out, which I think is very important, especially in the Philippines, because maraming naniwala na autism is caused by vaccines. But do we already have an idea on what causes autism?
There is certain predisposition in developing autism. However, we don't know yet what the specific cause is. So regarding the vaccines, I think the reason why people initially believed it was because of vaccines, because the symptoms come out usually at 18 to 24 months when we give the MMR vaccine. So maybe that's why they thought it was caused by the vaccine. So predisposing factors include genetics. So based on twin studies, families who would have one person with autism would have predisposition of having another child with autism. Other predisposing conditions include preterm delivery, high-risk pregnancies. So those are the more common ones that they think of as cause of autism.
With that wide range of people falling into the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, how specialized can that treatment be?
So the main focus of the interventions would be to minimize the core deficit, maximize adaptive functions, and minimize the coexisting conditions when they grow up. It should be individualized, so it depends on the needs of every child.
Ms. Mona, let's talk about some of the more common challenges that adults with ASD may have.
What I see as deficits would be inability or lack of tact when they speak. So they are sometimes misunderstood in the workplace. Another one would be their lack of desire to work in a team, and they would rather work alone. They excel in solitary activities. Another thing would be the stress that they receive when you give them deadlines or when they would have to socialize. Those are factors that for the rest of us that don't really matter, but for them it gives them a high level of anxiety.
What are the basics when it comes to those with ASD? A lot of people may think that they need to have their space around them, they cannot be touched. Are these sort of misconceptions true? Do these still hold true now, or should that vary per individual?
Whenever I have sensitivity trainings, and I do this for employers, for example, you have to talk to the individual because they are so unique. Then you have to ask them, how do you want to be called? Do you get offended when I call you autistic? Is it okay for you to be touched? Do you want a little bit more space? Do you need a headset? It's the same for when they are in college and when they are at work. So all of these things matter. And the key thing here is you have to ask them, you have to talk to them, you have to be with them so that you can find out more about individuals on the autism spectrum.
Now, for many people with ASD, living with this condition is not easy. When we return, we'll talk about this and how it affects their families. Your health is our mission. This is Med Talk Health Talk.
SMC, San Miguel Corporation. Bisag unsang industriya ang sudlan niini, tinguha sa SMC ang pag-uswag o paglambo sa mga Pilipino. Karon, gikan sa SMC, aniya na ang SMC Davao Cement. SMC Davao Cement. Gama sa Davao, para sa Mindanao. SMC Davao Cement. Ato ni Bay.
Persons living with ASD often need support from family as well as other people around them. Now, we're here to discuss how you can help people living with ASD. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and you're watching Med Talk Health Talk, where your healthcare always comes first. Dr. Catherine, what are some of the treatment management options with someone who is diagnosed with ASD?
We usually refer our patients initially for occupational therapy to work on their behavior so that the therapist could help them sit for a long time, pay attention when taught. This would also address their play and their self-help skills. So once they're okay already, we start speech therapy sessions so that they could be taught how to communicate. Also, we always emphasize that family support is very important. People in the house or the family should always support the growth of the child.
Are there tests to see if they can cope up with normal school? Dapat ba special school? Could performance in a normal school be a red flag na baka may autism ang bata?
The choice of school is dependent on the child's needs or the child's abilities. So if we see that they could comprehend, that they could answer questions, or sometimes we do academic testings in the clinic and they could do well in a regular school, then we advise them to be in a regular school. But some kids, they would have difficulties with reading comprehension. Then we suggest putting them or enrolling them in a special school.
Now, Mona, can therapy help someone with ASD function better in society?
They are very helpful in keeping a child engaged in the community. Speech therapy, occupational therapy are very important because these are pre-learning skills. But once they are older, like for now, like there's a pandemic, imagine a child on the spectrum stuck at home who cannot go out, who cannot participate in a community activity. So for the Autism Society Philippines, it has become very important. It has become a priority that we continue our non-traditional intervention by providing opportunities for them to come together on Zoom or on any other platform. It is important for them to flex those skills that they should be flexing if it were face-to-face.
Now, before we go, Dr. Kath, do you have any message for our viewers?
There is always hope in children with autism. When you have a gut feeling that something's wrong, that your child is not developing well, consult at once.
And Mona, any words to say for our viewers when it comes to ASD? And please share with them how they can get in touch with Autism Society Philippines as well.
Autism is a lifelong developmental condition. Those on the autism spectrum can live productive, meaningful lives with early intervention, unconditional love, and societal acceptance. You can go to Autism Society Philippines Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram for details. And let's join hands, cooperate in inspiring acceptance, accommodation, and appreciation for those on the autism spectrum.
This discussion was very helpful, I'm sure, for a lot of our viewers. Thank you, developmental pediatrician Dr. Catherine Baltazar Braganza and ASP National President Ms. Mona Magno-Veluz. Research continues to advance our understanding of autism, but there is still a lot more to learn. In the meantime, it's best to seek help as soon as you suspect that there is something off or something wrong. The earlier children with this disorder can get help, the greater their chances of treatment success. Stay safe, everyone. We want to be your partner for a lifetime of good health. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and this has been Med Talk Health Talk on CNN Philippines.